Carson Beck said exactly what he needed to say about Miami's college football playoff situation. All we can do is continue to win.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Postgame on the Hurricanes Radio Network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen. We're available wherever you get your podcasts. We're available on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network in the world. On this loaded episode, we'll talk recruiting. Miami has landed commits, flips in 3 straight nights. And we could be getting more flips as soon as this week. And we got a recruiting question about a certain position I want to address. A lot of folks are asking about the quarterback situation beyond this year. I'll give you my 2 cents. We'll talk about Miami's college football playoff scenarios because I have them clearly laid out to me. Exactly what has to happen for the Canes to either win the ACC, unlikely, or get an at-large bid, more likely. Because I think we can all agree, we did a show on this last night, when the new CFP rankings came out, Miami now being at number 15, I firmly believe puts the Hurricanes within striking range that if they win out, they got to win their next 3. But if they win out and go 10-2, being number 15 right now, I believe there's going to be enough chaos and cannibalization of the teams in front of you that Miami is going to be in position at 10-2 to make the college football playoff. Carson Beck was asked about that today, and I loved his response, like flat out loved it. So it was Matt Shodell of Cane Sport who asked Carson Beck. Beck had his media session today, Miami's QB1, about, how do you guys like block out the distraction that comes with the ranking and thinking about that. And Beck, and I do believe he was fully sincere in this. There was no sarcasm. He was not being coy. He didn't know. He did not know what Miami's new ranking was. Wasn't paying attention to it. And you know what? If possible, I don't want anyone in that building paying attention to it. I don't want anyone dwelling on where are we ranked and what has to happen for us to get in, because that's outside of the winning part of it. You can't control the other stuff. And so I loved the fact that Carson didn't know. Shodell had to tell him, you guys moved up from number 18 to number 15. Here's what Beck said about it. I don't know. I kind of talked about it last week. All we can do is continue to win, he said. That's all we can control. Execute every day. Ultimately, Saturday, go up and put up more points than our opponent. What we are ranked is somewhat out of our control, somewhat not. We'll get to that in a second. Beck talked a little bit about something that Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator, talked about on Monday. We've talked about this the last few weeks on Locked On Canes, about playing a little bit more loose on offense to hit those big plays. Beck said the key is playing loose. Don't worry about the rankings because that can make your teammates stiff and tense, he said. Quote, football is meant to be played loose, having fun. That's our mindset. Play loose and have fun. So, all right, so when Beck said that what we're ranked is somewhat out of our control, somewhat not. Like, okay, it's obvious what's in your control, winning. And, Miami unfortunately hasn't done enough of that. I mean, if you'd beaten SMU a couple of weeks ago, you would be firmly within the field of 12 and not on the fringes of it. But we can't change the past, right? So it's somewhat out of your control because, even if Miami wins out, you're still at the mercy of how the committee perceives you. How are they, at the end of a full season, going to weigh your head-to-head against Notre Dame? Because if the teams continue to kind of tighten up in terms of where they're ranked, the head-to-head may not come into play now, but it might come into play at the end of the season. So Miami needs to keep winning. That's the part that they can't control, is how the committee is going to perceive you, because ultimately you've got a dozen and a half, middle-aged to elderly folks who are going to sit down at a table and sort it out, right? That's the part you can't control. In terms of what Miami can control, here's my take. Number one, Clean up the drops. Those have gone up in recent weeks. We're expecting to get C.J. Daniels back on the field this Saturday. He's missed the past 2 games, one of Miami's top 2 receivers. C.J., he's had a couple drops this year, but overall he's been very sure-handed. So I would imagine having C.J. back in the lineup is going to help Miami because, you did have a couple of drops against Syracuse, one that would have been for a first down by JoJo Trader early on in the game. But the SMU game, Miami lost that 2 weeks ago. That was the big one for drops. Hurricanes had a season-high 5 receiver drops in the SMU game. Clean it up, keep it cleaned up. That's something Miami can control. Another thing, Beck talked about it. Shannon Dawson talked about it. Cristobal talked about it. Better sideline energy for the offense. Play loose. Big plays, I think, are needed early in the game. Miami didn't make their big play until late second quarter against Syracuse. The 41 screen run after catch by Dalen Upshaw, that's what loosened up the entire offense, right? You're going to need to hit some plays like that earlier on and break up some of the tenseness. I think that's a word. Break up some of that and allow these guys to have fun out there and score some points because I think you're going to need to score some points against NC State. Their offense is really prolific. Even if Miami's defense does a pretty good job against them, I think NC State is still going to be able to score some points this week. 2 more things, and we're sticking with the offense here because that's what Beck is talking about. 2 more things Miami can control. 3, keep the turnovers down. It's not rocket science. As you would imagine, in the 2 games that Miami lost this year, they didn't just lose on the scoreboard. They lost on the turnover margin in both of those games. You were -3 in turnovers against Louisville, and you were -1 against SMU. Now, the other thing that you have lost in the games where you've been defeated this year are the penalties, right? Some of that's in your control, some of it not as much, right? Because I got to give credit to Manny Navarro from The Athletic because he did the heavy lifting on this when it came to looking up the numbers. He posted this on his X account earlier today, Wednesday, or it might have been on Tuesday night. Miami, obviously, they have had problems with committing penalties and being an undisciplined team at times, but the spread for Miami on penalties committed versus penalties committed by your opponents, the biggest spread in all of college football. Miami has been called for 33 more penalties than their opponents. Now, is part of it on the Miami side? Jumping for too many false starts, jumping off sides, a couple knuckleheaded holding penalties. There's been some of that. Miami's had their issues with discipline. But on the other side, how many uncalled holds have there been, blatant ones, on Ruben Bain Jr.? Happens on, I know people always say this, holding happens on every play. That's only true if Ruben Bain Jr. is on one of your edges. It happens on almost every play against Miami, and it's rarely ever called. There have been calls that have been made, unsportsmanlike conduct that have been called against Miami, and the same things are not called against Miami's opponents. You guys remember, when Malachi Toney laid a guy out with a pancake block and kind of stood over him for a second, and they whistled him for unsportsmanlike. And then there was the situation in the SMU game when Elijah Lofton was laid out and injured on a big hit. The defender stood over him, which by the letter of the rule is taunting, doesn't get called. It gets called when you're wearing an orange, green, or white jersey, does not get called if you're Miami's opponent. So these are the sort of things. But again, I digress. It's a little bit of a rant. You can control your own penalties. So you can't necessarily control the penalties that are being called or not called against your opponents, but for the most part, Miami can control the discipline. I was really happy to see in the Syracuse game that a conscious adjustment, a very deliberate adjustment was made to cut down on the false starts. Miami did that. Let's carry that over into NC State and beyond. That's something you can control. We're going to open up to you guys' questions on the Locked On Canes Insiders chat when we come back. If you want to become an insider, click the link in the show description below and try it free for 14 days. Then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. We have a question, and I will give you a very detailed answer. The exact scenarios required for Miami to reach the college football playoff. we'll have it right here for you on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Folks, when the opening whistle blows on a new repair, get your crew moving forward with Supply House. Order today and see parts on your doorstep tomorrow. Over 280,000 plumbing, HVAC, and electrical items from the most trusted brands in the business. Their real-time inventory and honest lead times keep you from punting projects, while their industry-leading customer service always has your blind side covered. You need parts for a project? Supply House has next-day delivery. Talk about a game changer. The Part Finder tools and 3D schematics can save you hours on jobs where every detail matters. Join their free Trade Master program today and score serious perks like priority shipping, lower prices, and a dedicated support line. Visit supplyhouse.com to sign up for free and use promo code SHCollege5 for 5% off your order. That's supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen, and thank you to the Everydayers for making the Locked On Podcast Network the #1 sports podcast network. We couldn't be #1 without you guys, the ones who click on our content. You live every day with us here on Locked On Canes and all the other great shows. I also host Locked On ACC. Thank you so much for the support, and we continue to bring you your team every day. All right, we get a similar questions. 994 Canes alum says, based on the recent CFP ranking, aside from the need for us to finish 100% winning out, what other chips need to fall to pave the way for our entrance into the playoff bracket? We also get a similar question from Scott in West Palm, who says, I would like to better understand if we win out and we're number 11 or 12, how does the conference champions of the other top 5 play into the risk that we would get knocked back out of the 12 playoff teams by a lower ranked team that gets in through the automatic bid? That's a great question, where you would likely need to actually be number 10, right? Because there could be 2 conference whoever wins the ACC is probably going to be ranked behind you, ironically enough, because Miami likely won't get to the ACC championship game. And whoever is the top group of 5 champion would likely be ranked behind you. So you're right. You probably would have to be number 10. I still think that's achievable. Something to consider before I dive into the exact scenarios is the committee has shown you that leapfrogging teams is possible. Miami just leapfrogged Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech fans are pissed, and I get it. Like, I totally understand it, because Georgia Tech, before their bye week, was ranked ahead of Miami. And then the bye week happens. Miami beats, the bad Syracuse team during Georgia Tech's bye, and Miami leapfrogs Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, by the way, has only 1 loss. Miami has 2. So Georgia Tech fans are pissed, okay? In my opinion, why Miami leapfrogged Georgia Tech? I think in the committee's mind, Miami has better wins than Georgia Tech, who hasn't really played anybody. Like, they're going to play Georgia, so if they do beat Georgia, that's a quality win, okay? But their biggest non-conference game to this point was a win over 3-7 Colorado. Like, that's the best thing on Georgia Tech's non-conference. They have better conference wins, but you see what I'm saying here. I think the committee thinks Miami has proven more, and they value the win over Notre Dame more than anything Georgia Tech has done. But in Miami leapfrogging Georgia Tech, it shows you the committee is willing to do that, right? So you have teams sitting a spot and 2 ahead of Miami, like Utah, who doesn't have an impressive resume at this point, and Vanderbilt, who their losses are better than their wins at 14, Utah at 13. I think it's possible for Miami to jump those teams potentially, even if they don't lose again. Vanderbilt might lose again. I'm not sure about Utah. But leapfrogging teams is possible. But let me get into the exact scenarios. By the way, for those watching the video, you notice I never wear glasses, and I'm wearing glasses today, and I can't stand something being on my face. So I'll probably never do this again. I'm back to my contact lenses tomorrow. I can almost assure you that. They're bothering me. But let's get into this. And I give credit to my guy, frequent guest on the show, my paisan, Phil Russomano, who I think he's the one, he sent this to me. I think he's the one who crunched the numbers on this one. Phil has multiple postgraduate degrees. He's got like 2 masters and a bachelor's at Miami. So he sent me these scenarios. First, the more likely path to the playoff for Miami would be an at-large bid, right? Because chances of reaching the ACC championship game are very slim. At large is more likely. So here is what needs to happen for Miami to get a bid. First thing, as you said in the question, you have to win out and probably win out convincingly. I think style points do matter the rest of the way. So you have to win out. And then 4 of the teams ahead of Miami need to drop behind you. The teams to focus on here. Texas Tech. You need them. You don't need all of these teams to lose games, by the way, but you need 4 of these teams to lose. One team to watch is Texas Tech. You need them to either lose to UCF or West Virginia. I find that to be unlikely. I don't think that's going to happen. Then you have Ole Miss, would need to lose to Florida or lose to Mississippi State convincingly. I doubt it. Florida doesn't look like world beaters right now. Ole Miss should be able to beat Mississippi State, but you know what? Egg Bowl, it's an in-state rivalry. Those games can get crazy, so maybe. Oregon, I don't think this is going to happen. They would need to lose 2 out of 3 games to Minnesota, USC, and Washington. I think they lose 1 of those games at worst. I don't think they're losing 2. That's unlikely. Notre Dame would need to lose to Pitt. Now, I know this one's a little bit controversial because some people would say, no. Miami needs Notre Dame to keep winning so that win looks better for your strength of schedule. I don't know about that because I'm not convinced the committee would actually leapfrog Miami over Notre Dame if they both go 10-2, despite the head-to-head win. I don't expect the committee to do that. So I think Notre Dame losing to Pittsburgh and going to 3 losses. And then, of course, you have to hope and assume Miami beats Pittsburgh because you need to win out anyway. If you have a win over Pitt and Notre Dame has a loss to them, I think Notre Dame losing to Pitt would help you. Follow-up question, Donno. Do you expect Notre Dame to lose to Pitt? No, I don't. Pitt's head coach said this week, it's okay if we lose this game by 100 points because only our conference games matter. So Narduzzi is putting a lot of bad juju out there. So I don't expect Pitt to beat Notre Dame, but it would be good for Miami if they did. Let's move on. Oklahoma, I absolutely think they're going to lose again. They would have to lose a game to either Alabama, who they probably will lose to, in my humble opinion. Missouri, maybe. LSU, meh. But I think Oklahoma's going to lose to Bama. BYU, you need them to lose one to either TCU, could happen. Cincinnati, could happen. UCF stinks. But they could lose one of those games, BYU. Utah, lose to either Baylor, Kansas State, or Kansas. Maybe. Vanderbilt, lose to either Kentucky or Tennessee. Tennessee, to me, is a team that could be able to catch Vandy this year. So that you need 4 of those teams to lose. We gave you the scenario there if Miami wins out. Now, the less likely situation would be Miami winning the ACC championship game, right? So if Miami wins out, they could get to the ACC title game if, and all of these things have to happen, by the way. Georgia Tech would need to lose a game to either Boston College or Pitt. Pitt, maybe. Boston College, they're not beating anybody. They're awful. They're 1-9 on the year. Embarrassing. But Georgia Tech maybe could lose to Pitt. UVA would need to lose one to either Duke or Virginia Tech. Honestly, UVA could lose both of those games. They're better than Virginia Tech, but that's a rivalry. Duke, I believe, is better than UVA, and I don't know if Chandler Morris is back this week. He was in concussion protocol, UVA's quarterback. I'm not sure if he's back on the field this week, so that could happen. UVA could lose. Pittsburgh, if you beat them, you take care of it, right? Head-to-head. Miami needs to beat Pitt. SMU would need to lose twice because they have a tiebreaker over you. They would need to lose to Louisville and Cal. Probably not losing both of those. Maybe they lose to Louisville, though. You know what, Cal could beat anybody. They could lose to anybody. They could beat anybody. You would need Duke to lose to one of UVA, UNC, or Wake Forest. Could happen. And you would need Louisville to lose to one of Clemson or SMU. Could happen. Those are, Clemson is not good, but they have a lot of talent. I think that game's on the road for them, so it could happen, and SMU is a pretty good team. So, and then Miami would have to win the ACC championship game. Unlikely enough of those teams lose. I think the at-large bid is far more likely. I appreciate the questions, guys. We get a question from Martin, who wants to know, Why does Miami start so slow, he said. It seems like you can see the mode of the team on the sideline, and we know what's going to happen. Notre Dame, FSU, and South Florida, we started fast, but why have we been starting slow? Part of it we've already answered on this episode. Miami often doesn't really turn it up until they get the juice from a big play, right? So if you can get an explosive 25, 30, 41-yard gain early on, that seems to spark your offense. So execution, that's the first thing, right? Maybe if JoJo Trader had caught that first down, it would have sparked them a little bit earlier last week. Maybe if you hadn't given up 2 sacks in the first half of that Syracuse game, would have sparked you a little bit earlier. We know offensive approach and play calling is very important, right? There have been games where you just live in the A-gap, right? I think, aren't the Orange Bowl boys, aren't they selling A-gap T-shirts? Like, I don't want to buy an A-gap T-shirt because I want Miami filling all the gaps, right? So, get your running game a little bit more variety. I like the way Malachi Toney has been used recently because even if other teams are bracketing him and trying to take him out of the game, which will be harder to do this week, assuming C.J. Daniels is back, and it will be harder to do if Keelan Marion keeps playing the way he's playing. He's been great the past couple weeks. That was another guy, Carson, talked about him. He and Keelan have built nice chemistry. Keelan's an experienced guy. Went off for 3 catches, 117 yards, and a touchdown last week, and he's fast, right? So, more of your offensive weapons stepping up. And, again, and don't play so tight. These guys need to come into games a little bit more loose. But it's hard because if you're thinking about needing to be loose, it's hard to be loose when you're thinking about it. So, I think those are the reasons why Miami is starting slow. But, yeah, this past weekend, I thought Shannon Dawson called a really good game. Let's keep the variety and the creativity going. I think that's important. We get this one from ND Hater 85 who says, do you think that Mario calling off the dogs and going conservative against Notre Dame and Florida could cost Miami a chance at the playoffs? Style points matter. I don't think style points started to matter for Miami until they lost. So I look at it more as I don't think the committee is going to hold anything from your 5-0 start against you. I think with the committee, it's ever evolving. I think they're more curious to see how Miami responds from, losing 2 of your past 4 games at this point and from your offense not trending well recently. So I don't really think style points from your first game and your third game of the season are going to hurt you at this point. I think the committee is more in a what have you done for me lately type of mode, and they want to see Miami get more style points. Hopefully they did enough in the Syracuse game, hopefully. And I think they did. They did move up 3 spots in the rankings. So continue to do that against NC State, Virginia Tech, and Pittsburgh. And I think that's going to help you. And by the way, this is what the CFP selection chair, MARK RHODES, said about Miami after their spot was revealed. He said, the conversation with Miami has been about their consistency, especially on offense. He said, the head-to-head win with Notre Dame comes up. 7 straight for Notre Dame, better defensively than what they were at the beginning of the year. We've got great respect for Miami, he said. When you think about the eye test, they're really talented on both sides of the football. He says, we really look at each team on its own. We don't look at conferences. We look at each of the teams. I think for the ACC, when you look at their conference schedules, their non-conference schedules, there's really no signature wins other than Miami versus Notre Dame. Now, when he said that, Florida State fans got really angry. He's like, hey, we beat Bama. Maybe he forgot about that. Or I think he was just talking about the ACC teams that are in contention. I think he didn't mention Florida State because, Florida State is, they're not going to sniff the college football playoff. So, again, I think when you're talking style points, I think the style points are from here on out. Because the committee really seems to go based on recency bias and on current vibes. Those are important criteria for the committee, okay? We got an important question on the future of the quarterback position and on running back recruiting. I want to answer those when we come back. You want to keep it locked right here on Locked On Canes. Guys, the NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on all the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of the game or you want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Canes your first listen. All right, more questions from our Locked On Canes insiders. Hurricane Keys says, hey, with Miami being linked to Sellers from South Carolina, how do you think the Canes should proceed? We have some absolute potential dogs in the quarterback room right now. Do you see Mario trying to build within and give Judd, Emory, or Luke a shot, or does he go out and whale hunt again in the portal? If we portal again, then no point in recruiting the top quarterback guys. At some point, you have to trust your room and your recruiting, my opinion, he says. All right, so I respect your opinion and I share it. I've said that before on the show. But if I give you my opinion on what I think Miami is going to do, and this is just my opinion on what I believe they're going to do, I think if there is a potential stud quarterback, like you mentioned LENORRIS Sellers from South Carolina, Todd McShay has kind of been teasing that maybe Miami should be the spot for him. Or heck, if the guy you're about to face this weekend, CJ Bailey, if he decides to test the waters of the portal, I think Miami would look for every opportunity to upgrade. Why? Because you view your situation in this landscape, Miami's expectations right now, with the way they've recruited, with the way they've fortified the trenches, they brought in playmakers. Miami is expected to compete for college football playoffs every single year, right? You are expected to be in that hunt every single season. And if you're not, I know it's easy for us to say, hey, you know what? Maybe you should give, a redshirt freshman quarterback an opportunity. Maybe he's ready, maybe he's not, but let's let him learn on the job. It's easy to say that the November before the following season starts in September, but then once that season starts, and if your quarterback isn't ready, and if you have growing pains and lose games, right, you may not have that same patience for the process. And I think Miami's goal is to upgrade at every possible position. And again, this is my opinion of what they're going to do. I think if you have a clear upgrade available, and you look at, by the way, a ton of transfer quarterbacks, including, a guy like Cam Ward here, a guy who won the national championship last year at Ohio State. You look at what Bo Nix was doing at Oregon. Like, you've seen so many successful transfer portal quarterbacks around the country doing it at a high level, right? That's become a pretty good way to build at that position. Now, when it comes to the organic recruiting side of it, I guess, listen, this is the staff will have to answer the question, do they think that Emory Williams, who's going to be heading into his fourth year with the program next year, or really young guy like Luke Nickel, who's going to be heading into his second year, or, Judd Anderson heading into his third year, or DEREON Coleman heading into his first year next year, if they feel like one of the guys in the room is as good or maybe even better than who's available, they'll ride with what they have, right? Now, when you talk about recruiting, I understand your scenario, but I still think even if you went portal next year, I think you could still justify, like, Luke Nickel, so young, could still be the future here. DEREON Coleman, who's only going to be a true freshman, could still be the future here. I don't necessarily think that spoils everything the way that some people think it will. But again, just my opinion. I mean, if Miami ends up rolling organically with one of the guys that they have, I'm here for it, right? I followed the recruitment for all of these guys in the room, right? I'd love to see what they turn into, but ultimately we're in the business of winning games and competing for championships. And if Coach Cristobal and his staff decide that someone in the transfer portal gives them the best chance of doing that, I don't necessarily think they should hesitate either. Very much feel like I was on the fence on that, but I try to explain. Like, I try to explain the scenarios, and again, like the thought process. Like, if you feel like, if you go with a guy you have and maybe you go 8-4 versus you bring in somebody that can help you go 11-1 or 10-2, like, we're in the business of winning. Like, that's the way I answer that question. We get a good one from Andrew from Pennsylvania, who says, "Hey, are we hard pressing any class of 2026 running backs? Seems like it's really cooled off on the running back front." Obviously Miami for several months has had JAVION Mallory committed, and I do believe he's going to sign with Miami on National Signing Day. But it's not as quiet as you think. Now, maybe this is on me because I maybe don't talk about running back recruiting enough, because we've been talking so much about defensive line recruiting and defensive back recruiting lately. But no, Miami is very much in the hunt for another running back to potentially bring in 2. Watch out for the name AMARI LATIMER. He's currently committed to Wisconsin. He's out of Georgia, 4-star running back. Miami is looking to flip him. 230-pound beast of a back, 5'11". He's committed to the Wisconsin Badgers. If you've watched any Wisconsin, my condolences. They're awful. Like, I'd rather watch golf than watch Wisconsin play football. They're having a brutal, brutal season. And, it's not exactly become the most attractive destination for recruits. And Miami seems to have some momentum to flip AMARI LATIMER. I know Ohio State and Tennessee are also interested. And I think maybe Wisconsin knows that they might lose Latimer, because Wisconsin, I think it was just yesterday, they flipped a 3-star running back who was committed to FIU, Quantavious Wiggins, which was funny because Florida State thought that they were going to get him. And then Wisconsin was the team to flip Quantavious Wiggins. So that might be like a chess move, like a 4D chess. Like, hey, we might lose Latimer, so we're going to bring in this other guy. So, yeah, AMARI LATIMER is a name that I would definitely watch at that position. So keep your eyes peeled there. And, with all that Luke Fickell lawsuit nonsense, you wouldn't mind stealing a player from Wisconsin. We already stole one last year that they sued us over, but stealing another one, I wouldn't mind that too much. All right, make sure you smash the like button, subscribe to Locked On Canes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your pods. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Network #1, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.